mainly because I want to do more teaching than preaching today. And when I'm behind the pulpit and preaching, things are a little bit more formal. And if I happen to say something that you fully don't understand, or if you have a question, I don't want you to feel like it would be inappropriate. Just raise your hand and say, I'm not understanding that. And so I want to do more teaching than preaching. But that's what I want to talk to you about today, is one of the greatest debates, I guess you could say, among Christians and in the Christian faith, is the theology or the idea of, can we lose our salvation? Some churches teach that once you are saved, you cannot lose your salvation. Other churches teach that yes, a person can fall from grace. And I want to talk to you about, what does the Bible clearly say on that subject? Because it's actually when you take the different, I guess you could say, denominations, whether a person's Catholic, Baptist, Presbyterian, Methodist, Seventh-day Adventist, a lot of the differences that form the different denominations has to do on this topic, and it's a highly debatable topic on our salvation. And I want to start with, elaborating on what I was talking with the children about in the children's sermon, is where our salvation comes from, number one. And the Bible is very clear, our salvation comes from grace. In Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, says, "For by grace ye are saved through faith, and not of yourselves. It is a gift of God." That our salvation isn't anything that we can earn. And that's one of the biggest differences between Christianity and Judaism. In Jesus' time with the Jews and what he was trying to get across to them, in the Jewish religion, they were a works-based religion. The Jewish religion was. And so they had the laws of God, and you had to adhere to these laws. And what Jesus was trying to get across to them was, your salvation is a gift. In verse 9 it says, "Not of works, lest any man should boast." If it was something you could earn, then we'd have a right to brag about it. But a person that's, like I said, that's been saved a week is no less saved than a person that's been saved 50 years. But what I want to talk to you about, and one of the greatest debates in the Christian faith, is what happens when a person, let's say a person's saved and then they backslide. Does that person lose their salvation? And there's different theologies and beliefs on this, and you could take a debate, and I could show you just as many verses in the Bible that says no, you cannot lose your salvation. I can also show you very many verses that says yes, you can. And rather than point out a ton of verses on this and say, well, there's more verses that say you can't, or more verses that say you can, really when it comes down to it, and in order to fully answer this question, we need to define what a Christian is. What does it mean to be saved? Because when we take John 3:16, that's the basis of the Christian faith, that for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. What this verse is saying is, this is how we are getting our salvation. That Christ was the sacrifice. He was the last sacrificial lamb. He paid the price for our sins. He made the way for us to be saved. So once he's, if you've accepted Christ, and once you've become a child of God, is it possible for you to fall away? Is it possible for a person to fall away and lose their salvation? Next slide, Melva. John 2:3-4. 1 John chapter 2, verses 3 and 4 says, "And hereby we do know that we know him, if we keep his commandments. He that saith, I know him, and keepeth not his commandments, is a liar, and the truth is not with him." When we define what a Christian is, there's a lot of people, if you go out, if you look at statistics, it's something like 85% of Americans profess Christianity. Well, if that's really the case, then why is it 85% of the population in church this morning? worshiping. And really what it boils down to is there's a lot of people that profess Christianity that truly aren't saved, is what I think, because they're resting their salvation on something that they have done, or that the family that they grew up in, or they might have grown up in church, and they're really not serving God. And this is where Jesus warns about this in Matthew chapter 7, where he says there will be those in fact, I think we have that slide up there. Is that on the next one? Yeah, Matthew 7:21, not everyone that says unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven. So when you elaborate a little bit on this in Matthew chapter 7, he goes a little bit further. Let me open that up. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 21, which we have on the board, when you go to verse 22, he goes into a little bit more detail. It says, many will say to me unto that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name? And in thy name have cast out devils, and in thy name done many wonderful works. That's really sobering. If you think about it, this is probably one of the most sobering verses in the Bible. It is for somebody, essentially the picture that he's painting is that in the final judgment, there will be people that say, Lord, didn't I prophesy in your name? That takes a certain amount of faith. Didn't I cast out demons in your name? Didn't I do these great works? And Jesus is going to say, depart from me, for I never knew you. And for a long time, I used to think, well, this was people that were saved and they must have backslid and they had lost their salvation. But actually what I think Jesus was referring to here is, people that they profess Christianity. They might have put on the airs that they were Christian, but they weren't truly saved. Because he said, depart from me, for I never knew you. And so to sum it up, and I probably won't get through all of this today. I'm not going to keep you here all afternoon because this is a broad topic. To sum it all up, when you get saved and you are truly a child of God, Jesus said, a man who loves me keeps my commandments. If you are truly saved, you have that desire to follow Christ. You have that desire to turn from your wicked ways. Now, does that mean that you're going to be free from sin? Absolutely not. We are human. We have that sinful nature. But you are redeemed and you are sealed. And in Revelation, it says that what God has sealed can no man take away. I actually like kind of John MacArthur's answer to this when he was asked, can you lose your salvation? He said, if you could lose your salvation, you would. You would. Because we have a sinful nature. You would have already lost your sinful nature. And then on top of that, it's pretty arrogant to say, if you haven't lost your salvation. If it was possible for us to lose our salvation once we're saved, if it's possible for us to lose our salvation, it would be pretty arrogant to say, well, I'm saved, but I can mess this up now. I can mess this up, but I haven't. That would be a pretty arrogant thing to say, that you could lose your salvation. It would be pretty arrogant to say, yes, you could lose your salvation, but you haven't yet. And so... Did. I'm sorry?
Because you just did.
Yeah, because you just did. By being that arrogant, you just did. But now let's take this a step further. And I just want to kind of take this thought then. What happens if we've all know people, or we might have done it in the past, where you might be serving the Lord and you start to fall away, you start to care about the things of the world, and you start to backslide. What about that person that backslides? Have they lost their salvation?
No.
And this is where the different churches they get some different viewpoints, and it's what causes some of the different denominational differences. To say, I worked with one man one time. He said that he had missed going to church about 3 times in 3 weeks in a row. And somebody in his church called him and to check on him and said, you're losing your salvation. You're committing a carnal sin by not being in church. That was actually what his church was teaching, was by not being in church, he was committing a carnal sin. And I said, I wouldn't say you're committing that carnal sin. When you were truly saved, you have that desire to want to follow Christ. You have that desire to want to follow, the laws of God, to be right. You don't have that same, you're not going to be free from sin, but the Lord starts working with you, and that's what sanctification is he starts working on you and turning your old ways to where you just don't have that desire. Some few years back, to take a little bit step further, all of us when we're younger and you're out running around and you have a good time running with certain crowds and partying and all that. One time, Melvin and I we got to talking about our old days of that and going out like country dancing, and we said, that it's been a long time since we've done that. Let's go out and have a good time on a Friday night, and let's go out to the country bar and dance hall, and we'll dance and we'll have a good time. We got there, I ain't kidding you, we were like fish out of water. It had been so long, number one, since we had done that, but we said, we're not enjoying this company that we're keeping. And, it's just, we don't have we're not getting the same enjoyment we did, and could it have been because, when I was 20 years old, that was my idea of fun, and at 50, that's no longer my idea of fun. I think it's also because the Lord just kind of convicts your heart, and things that I found enjoyable, they're not really that enjoyable.
That's right.
We just weren't having that, we weren't getting that enjoyment out of it. And that's what I think, that's part of sanctification. The things that we found as fun and things that we found as entertaining, they weren't quite as entertaining to us. And that's part of sanctification, where God kind of changes your heart and he prods you. Now, different when it comes to sanctification, one thing I do want to stress, because I've heard people say this too, well, when I got saved, I no longer wanted to drink, I didn't smoke, I never let a cuss word has never come out of my mouth again, and I didn't want to do nothing but eat celery sticks and talk about Jesus. Well, and so they want to look down on a person that their sanctification process might be a little bit slower or longer. Because some people are that way. They might be saved, they might truly believe, and they might have a struggle with a sin. The Bible is clear that when we get saved, we get a measure of faith. Now, one person might have a little bit larger measure of faith than the other. And that's just part of God's plan and God working with that person. And it's not something that we're supposed to judge. That's the big problem that a lot of people have, is that, and especially Christians, is we want to judge others. We want to say, well, this person isn't as righteous as I am, and so they must not be as saved as I am. And that's really, it's a sin to be kind of judging that way. So being saved, we're not free from sin. We're not free from sin at all. Or because I've heard people, I've been asked that too, that I'm a Christian and I believe and I want to follow the ways of God, but I keep finding myself falling into this same sin. Mm-hmm. Well, that's because you're human. Well, is it right that I keep going to the Lord and asking for forgiveness? Well, yes, it is, and because the Bible's clear that He is faithful to forgive you your sin. But now, what about the person that might just completely backslide? And I'm not talking backslide into Sunday school. I'm talking about just completely turn their way, turn against God. Well, chances are they were never saved to begin with. That's what I would think, is when we define what a Christian is because when you are truly saved and you are truly a child of God, He has sealed you and He writes your name in the Lamb's Book of Life. And people take a verse from Revelation about Him blotting that out, and I think they misinterpret that verse. Because he says that He will not blot your name out of the book of life, and they take that, well, maybe it's a possibility that God would blot you out. Next slide, Melba. And it's Revelation 3:5. He that overcometh, the same shall be clothed in white raiment, and I will not blot out his name out of the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. Some people, I think, are misinterpreting this verse to say, well, it is possible that God would blot your name out of the book of life. What he's saying is He won't blot your book of, your name out. Just like I've heard people say, well, this verse means, when it says he that overcometh. Well, a person that backslides, then God could blot your name out of the book of life. I tend to look at this, if we look at things a little bit on a smaller scale, I guess if you look at things a little bit more, take our relationship with God and take it on a smaller scale, your relationship with your children. What sin or what wrongdoing would your children have to do where you say that you are not my child anymore? Or when you're raising your children, when your children do something wrong, none of my children, even though there was times that I wanted to just pinch their head off and hang them on the wall and have it mounted on a wall so they would stay cute forever and not turn on me, even though sometimes I got so frustrated with them, at no time did they ever do something that was so vile that they had to come back and say, Dad, can I still be a part of the family? Can I join a part of the family? No, you're my child. You're still, and God's that same way with us. When we are a child of God and you are truly saved, you can't lose that salvation. Now, can you disappoint Him? I'm sure you can grieve the Holy Spirit, and that's a whole nother issue. There's one portion of my life that I don't share a whole lot with people because I'm not too proud of it. I've shared often that I grew up in church. I don't remember any time not knowing who Jesus was. My parents were very active in the church. I grew up next door to my pastor. But like most young people, once I got out on my own and started experiencing the world, I started experiencing different things and the devil started moving in. And I joined the Marine Corps and I was traveling all over the world on different deployments and different training things. And there was times where we went to some of these countries and I remember thinking, these people are so poor. They literally gave a new definition to the term dirt floor poor, and their only sin that I see in life is they're born in the wrong country. How could there be a God that would allow these people to be in such poverty and under such harsh circumstances? And so I started reasoning with this, thinking, well, obviously God isn't the God that I grew up believing, that He's not a loving God that's looking after us, and so I started having doubt, and I started backsliding. Now, on your dog tags, when you're in the military, you have your dog tags, and it has your name and your social security number, your blood type. The very last line on your dog tags is what is your religion. And the idea is if you were to get killed, what type of service do they prepare for you? And so, like when I first came out of boot camp, I got my first issue of dog tags issued. It said Baptist, because that's what I had grown up with, Baptist. Well, I had backslid and turned so much away from God and was denying Christ. I actually had my dog tags changed. And now, nobody's going to go to combat with somebody. There's no such thing as an atheist in the Marine Corps. I will say that. Because number one, nobody's going to go to combat with you if you don't have God's protection. Nobody wants to be in the same fighting hole as somebody that denies Christ. They're just, the mentality of most of them is you do believe in God and you have that you profess Christianity because you want God to protect you if you get into combat. And so what they actually put on mine when I said I really just don't believe in God anymore, they put no preference on my dog tags because I was denying Christ. And so I came home on leave and my mother happened to see my dog tags. And she grew up in a family that all of her brothers were in the Navy. My dad and all of his brothers were in the Army. My parents knew very well what no preference on my dog tags meant. They knew that meant that I was in a stage of my life I was denying Christ. And I remember my mother asking me about this. And I was sitting here arguing with her, theologically that there can't be a God. And even though I was raised as a Christian, I completely turned my back. Well, I ended up going to the Philippines. And the Philippines is another one of these really, really poor countries. There's no such thing as a middle class there. You're either very affluent and very wealthy, or you're dirt floor poor. And I ended up meeting this, he was actually from North Carolina. He was a missionary from North Carolina. And he had prophesied, gave me a prophecy. And he told me, he said, you are not serving the Lord, but you once knew the Lord. And he told me then, he said, you deny Christ, you claim there is no God. He said, God's told me you're going to be in ministry. But if you don't straighten out, God's going to take you before he loses you to Satan, was what he told me. He said, God is going to take you out of this world before he loses you to Satan. And of course, I'm taking light of it. You know, I'm at a stage in my life I take light of it. Well, some weeks later, I get into a situation where I am certain, you know, that my soul is about ready to be required of me. I was scuba diving with some friends. We got in some rough water, got caught in a riptide, and I'm drowning. And I remember crying out to God then, because if I had died, if I had drowned, I'm not, you know, is it possible the Lord might have said, you've denied me and sent me to hell? Very possible. Mostly what I knew was that I was at a stage of my life where I did not want to be, I was not prepared to meet my Heavenly Father. I was not prepared to meet him, and I remember crying out to God saying, if you give me one more chance, if you get me out of this, I will serve you. And that was a pivotal moment in my life, because I knew then at that time that you know, that prophecy that missionary had given, I seen that was coming true. You know, he said, you know, your time is limited, and God's going to take you out if you don't, you know, turn back to him. And to me, that was a very pivotal moment in my life. You know, would I have lost my salvation? I'm not sure, but I do know that I would have been standing in front of the Lord, and the Lord would have said, you know, you were denying me. You know, maybe he was taking me out before he completely lost me to the devil. But I remember, you know, out there in the ocean, repenting, you know, and asking God for another opportunity. But really, when it also comes down to it, as far as can we lose our salvation, I think we as Christians are looking at this in the wrong light. Rather than asking, can we lose our salvation, we should be asking, are we truly saved? That's the question that instead of getting hung up on, can you lose your salvation or not, it should be, are we truly saved in the first place? Because there's so many people that are professing Christianity, or they say that they have that opportunity, you know, they claim that they're Christian, but they're not really living. Just this week, I had the opportunity to visit a man in the hospital, and I asked him, I said, if your soul was required of you today, would you go to heaven? And his response was, I certainly hope so, but I'm not sure. And he told me, he said, you know, at one time I said the sinner's prayer, but I haven't really lived it. And that's the problem that a lot of people, I think, are faced with. And that's a theology that I think is falsely taught too, is the sinner's prayer. You won't find the sinner's prayer in the Bible. And there's so many people that they went to a revival or they went to church and a pastor gave the invitation and they led them through a sinner's prayer. Now don't get me wrong, if somebody doesn't know how to pray, you've got to lead them through prayer, and I do get that. But giving people the idea that by saying a prayer that saved them, there's much more deeper meaning to our salvation than just reciting a prayer.
That's right.
And there's a lot of people running around saying, well, I said this sinner's prayer, and that sinner's prayer is going to end up sending people to hell because people think they're saved when they aren't truly saved. And so that's the ultimate question we really truly need to be asking, is not, can I lose my salvation? Because my answer would be, if it was possible to lose your salvation, you would. You absolutely would. But what we really want to, you know, so if you're truly saved, no, you can't lose your salvation. I don't mean to sound contradicting to myself that way. I don't think you can fall from grace if you're truly saved. If you are truly saved and you're truly a child of God, God has sealed you and he will protect you. But at the same time, there's people out there professing that they're saved that aren't truly saved. They're resting on something they've done. They're resting on their church membership. They're resting on their, who their daddy was. You know, daddy was a deacon. I grew up in the church. Daddy was a deacon, and they want to rest on things other than what their own faith and their belief is, or if they've ever truly accepted that gift. And that's what we should concentrate on more so than can we lose our salvation, is do we have our salvation in the first place? Let's go ahead and pray. Our Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day, Lord. I thank you for your word. Lord, I thank you for that gift of salvation. And Lord, if there are any here that are uncertain